In this tutorial, we're going to create a folded blanket. We'll be using a series of NURBS curves to follow a contour of this cube on which the blanket will fall. We'll then use the surface Loft tool and then finally the sculpting tools to put some variation on this so it doesn't look so static. I'm going to start by going to the orthographic view of this cube on which our blanket's going to be draped. And in that view, I'm going to go to Create, Curve Tool, Bezier Tool. And here we would simply draw something similar to a folded blanket if we would look at it in an orthographic view. This all can be re-edited because of the history as we proceed through the process. Once I've centered the pivot, I'm going to start to duplicate this and place it strategically around the parameter of this cube. So maybe I'll have one in the middle. And I'm going to go to the orthographic view now. If I hit 4 on the keyboard, I can start to rotate these as well. And the more you put in, the more control you'll have over your geometry. At this point, I'm going to rotate it so that it starts to drape and fall down over that cube shape. Now that I have that replicated Bezier curve placed where I'd like it to be, I'm going to use the surface and the Loft tool to generate the geometry that I want. Now I'm taking a moment just to do some editing here so it's not down in the geometry itself. And this can all be done once we've made it into a polygon. I'm going to shift select them from one end to the other in order. And I'll hold down my space bar and I'm going to go to Surfaces, Loft, and I'm going to go to the Attributes. Now in my Attributes, I'm setting section spans for 4, and that's going to give me more geometry so that I can kind of make this softer at some point. I'm choosing polygons, and I've bumped the count up to 300, and it's set for quads and count. And now when I hit Apply, it generates the beginning of that sheet I might want. I'll center the pivot. And I'm going to move it away from the Beziers because if I wanted to now I could go in and I could start to edit these points. This would immediately give us a bit of a variation on this. But I'm going to be using the Sculpt tool. And you can see because of the history we have control over that geometry still. I'm going to duplicate it so that I don't lose the history if I choose to return to it. And on this one though, I'm going to delete by type history. Now I'm going to add a tool to my shelf that'll allow me to make this a little bit more realistic and give me variation on this. I could have used the Beziers with soft select, but I'm going to use a sculpt tool for this. I'll hold down Command Shift. I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, and I'm going to go to Sculpt Tool, and I'm going to choose the very first one at the top, a little orange ball with kind of a half moon on it. And this tool is going to allow me to push and pull on this geometry. I'll click on the Sculpt tool, double click on it now as it appears on my toolbar on the far left, and here's the menu in which I can go in and play with the settings on this. Now this is where you would go in and start to play with these settings yourself. You'll notice that you've got size and strength, and if you put your cursor over your document, you'll see a brush shape, not unlike the one in Photoshop. So you can see you can change the size of that by changing the number for size. As in Photoshop, there's a keyboard quick for the brush in addition to the menu itself. So if I was to hold B on the keyboard and then drag left or right with my middle mouse, you can see you can change the size of the brush. This is where it gets pretty subjective, so the size of the brush and then the strength is really something you would want to play with and experiment to get the quality you want. Now, just like the key quick for the brush, there's also a key quick for the strength. When I hold down M on the keyboard and click with my middle mouse and drag back and forth, I see a little black vertical line. And the higher the line, the more strength. And again, you can make these settings here if you choose. So now if I start to brush, I can see I'm starting to softly make some changes on this. And if I wanted to, I could bump up the strength a bit. And I'm going to get more of an effect of the brush. Now, if I wanted to pull it up, I could click on the invert, and then the invert will allow me to pull that geometry up. Bear in mind, as you use this, it might start to look very, very hard and geometric. But always revert back to your poly proxy 3 key, and you'll see what the real contour would look like inside of the Arnold render window and or the polygon mesh smooth. If I chose to use the actual smooth feature on this and add more poly faces, it would be a matter of holding down the space bar and going to mesh and then choosing smooth. And you'll see you've been given a lot more polygon faces. Little thing to note is the more polygon faces, the more control you would have with this sculpting brush. I'll just go ahead and pop up the strength. You can see how dramatic this is with just a little bit of strength. So it's something you would kind of nurse along very, very gradually. And I would put a texture on this, and I know I would use automatic mapping for my texture to fall on that folded blanket correctly.